So thank you so much for joining this session on unlocking the value of flexibility. My name's Caroline Bragg. I'm going to give a very quick overview, right, just to get your sort of eye in what we're talking about, and then we're going to move straight on to our very interesting speakers today. Okay, so I don't know whether people should come a little bit this way. Does that sound good? No, people feel shy. Come a little bit, then we can all have a nice conversation. There you go. Okay, so just very quickly, so I'm the Senior Policy Manager at the Association for Decentralised Energy. If you haven't heard about the ADE, we basically, our point of view on the energy system is that for too long now we have started at the kind of big, large generation and supply. But really what we want to do is to start with the user instead. If we understand much more fully what the user wants from their energy service provision, then we can start making better policy and regulation. So, our vision is for a more local, a more efficient, low-carbon energy system that allows users to make the choices that are right for them. As a trade association, we represent heat networks, energy efficiency, CHP and generation, and of course demand-side response, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. Okay, so let's get on to it. So, demand-side response. I thought I'll start really from the top, and then we can work our way down into the fun details of where this market is at the minute. So, demand-side response is a wide range of technologies. It can be shifting your load, so air conditioning, heating, industrial processes, for example. It can be the use of storage, and it can be the use of generation. So, for example, the uninterruptible power supplies that you often find in hospitals, other sites. And the value of this is finding the flexibility within those assets that you can shift, aggregating them up to a point where actually we can be useful to both the local and the national power systems. So, how do you make money out of this stuff at the minute? I wanted to start, I suppose, with a disclaimer slightly, which is that the demand-side response market at the minute is focused on industrial and commercial. We are starting with trials with other kind of first projects to move into the domestic space, but this sector is still focused on industrial and commercial. So what we want to do today, I think, is demonstrate where that sector has got to, where we can see that there is value there, and then the lessons we can learn for that as that starts to move into the domestic side of things. So, at the minute, one of the easiest ways you can make money and monetize some of this flexibility is through your response to the distribution network. On the distribution network, what we need to manage is that evening peak, which is the 4 till 7 p.m. when we all go home and we turn the kettle on. If you can shift your demand away from those periods, then you can get lower network charges. It's quite a simple way of doing things. The problem with this, which is why I've put it in yellow, is that all of this is under reform at the minute. So it's a little bit uncertain what those future revenues are going to be. You can do the same thing at transmission. So at transmission, what we're looking at is the peak over the winter season. So those worst periods in the winter, when there's a howler, a bit like the Beast from the East, right? Beast from the East was the worst point in the winter for the network last year. And what you want to do is move your consumption away from those periods, so you're helping to relieve the stress on the system. And if you do that, you face lower network charges. That is for now. These are also under quite considerable reform, as lots of people who work in this sector are aware, which is why they're yellow. But there's still a real value there. It's just how it shakes out. Thirdly, the capacity market. So there is a real value to the system in being able to increase your generation or reduce your demand at they're very exceptional points in our energy system when it's getting so tight that we might face the lights going out. And what you effectively do is you can contract with government and National Grid to be held on retainer so that you can respond when we really get into dire straits. The reason why this is yellow is because the state aid approval of the capacity market has been withdrawn after a successful legal challenge. It actually happened the day that the withdrawal bill was also published. So everything went totally Pete Tong. But we in government we're confident that the state aids will be reinstated over the next few months, and the capacity market will be back up and running by next winter. So it's an important market to be aware of. So moving into the more complex areas of the energy system is balancing services. So balancing services are basically the way in which National Grid balances demand and supply on a sort of second by second basis. These include things like, a little bit like the capacity market, but on a shorter term basis. So you get held on retainer and then you can respond in a few hours when the system needs you. Or even more complex services where you are adjusting your demand and generation against the frequency of the national grid, so that we can keep it in line. These have been a real boon to the DSR market flexibility sector more generally, and will continue to be so. So it's important. So, looking forward, I suppose, into 2019, which is going to be a very exciting year, we have a new pan-European reserve market called TER, which has really quite huge potential to expand the money and the revenues that you can make out of DSR. Through that, as well, we will have, for the first time, independent access to aggregators to the balancing mechanism. So the balancing mechanism is a multi-million pound market. It is huge. It is the way in which National Grid is moving large amounts of energy up and down so that they balance. And the importance of this long term is that the need for this market is going to grow as we get higher renewables, as things get more volatile. So the place of DSR in that market is really important. And that's what we're going to start to see this year. We've also got kind of stuff that was started over the last year or so, but should start really picking up over this year and next, is some of the domestic DSR innovation competitions that the likes of BEIS and others are running. I think these are really important, and it's probably something that we can get into in the discussion, because there'll be a way of us trying to figure out the detail of how you get value out of quite small but large portfolios of domestic aggregated assets. And the fruits of these competitions are how we structure markets in the long term to accept domestic DSR. And then I finally wanted to talk very briefly about retail. So at the minute, I'm sure you're aware, so the majority of retail tariffs are relatively flat, right? There's not a huge difference between you using energy when it's good for the system and using energy when it's less helpful. I think what we're seeing over the last few years is we've got some better time of use tariffs now starting to come out. So you've got things like, for example, Bulb or OVO are now starting to look at this. And as we get more into more EVs, for example, more heat pumps, and actually managing domestic demand becomes much more important, we expect this to grow. So I put it as yellow at the minute because it's all a bit sort of right at the start, but hopefully in the next few years we'll see this really take off. Okay, so where does that leave us in terms of, big picture future before we get into the really interesting projects that we're going to hear about? I wanted to give you a sense of where this could go sort of in the 2040s, 2050s as we fully decarbonise. So National Grid thinks that to reach our carbon compliant, so the fifth carbon budget and beyond, we will need at least 4 gigawatts of just industrial and commercial DSR. There's a massive opportunity there. This has been supported by more recent research. So when you look at, for example, the work that is investigating how do you keep the system operable with very, very high penetrations of renewables, so on the order of 60 to 70% renewables, you're looking at 25 gigawatts of storage and DSR that they think is going to be needed. Again, also massive. And I think the thing that this really underlines, most of all, is that having a really strong, robust DSR sector across all scales is going to be really important to making sure that we can transition to a low-carbon energy system in a cost-effective way. So I wanted to finally highlight this really interesting research that's been done by Imperial College and OVO Energy that showed that when we get to very low levels of carbon, so this is 25 grams, for reference, the fifth carbon budget, which is where we need to be in 2032, is only 100 grams. But if we get to 25 grams for the energy system, the use of smart appliances, intelligent use of EVs and electrified heating mean that we save 6.9 billion. These are really big numbers, and I hope you'll see a massive opportunity.